Hello and welcome to part 32 of the series on how to create a chess game with ReactJS. In this part we're going to fix two bugs that are currently in the application. The first bug is a bug that I could not reproduce in Firefox. So if I click on a tile and I drag it onto a piece and then move the piece should be bugged. But it's not bugged, it's just working. So in order to reproduce this bug, what we can do is we can open up Chrome right here. And if we go to Chrome and then drag a tile onto a piece and then grab that piece, as you can see, we now get a reared cursor and the piece isn't following the cursor at all. If we now release the mouse cursor, we see that the piece is following the cursor again. And now if we click somewhere, we see that the game is bugged because that piece is just floating there. This was something that Lesbarian Links pointed out, so thank you for pointing that out. Let's fix it. In order to fix this, what we are going to do is we are going to open up the console down here. And right here, we see that we get some warnings. And let's first of all get rid of those warnings. So inside of here, source referee, I think it's in source component/referee. So right here, component/referee, we see that we get a lot of messages that we are importing stuff that we don't use. So let's scroll to the top. And right here we see that we are not using the use effect, so we can remove that. Then we also see that those two are grayed out. So the imports that are grayed out, those are the imports that are not being used. So we can just remove them without crashing the program. Let's save this up. And now if we refresh the page, we see that we get a lot less warnings. We also see that the isValidMove method is not being used, which is down here. So let's just remove that, and if we need it, we can add it back in later. Alright, so I think I removed a little bit too much. No, it should be fine. So right now, if we do this and save it up, refresh the page, we are good to go again. And now we get a couple of other things, which will be bishop is defined but never used. And I think it's from up here. Yeah, so we are importing a lot of things up here, but we don't use them. All right, so let's refresh it again. And now we see that we still have a couple of image elements. They say that the image elements must have an alt prop, either with meaningful text or an empty string for decorative images. All right, so those are at line 139. By pressing Ctrl G, we can go to this line directly. And here we see that we have an image for the rook, for the bishop, the knight. So it's best practice to add an alt prop to the image. So right here, in case the image doesn't load or in case that the person cannot see the image, we want to say alt is equal to rook, and then we can copy this over to here, and this will be the bishop. Then we have the knight and the queen. So this will be the knight, and then down here we have the queen. And now if we save this up and refresh the page, we see that we don't have any warnings anymore. Great, this cleans up our console, and now we can properly debug. So let's drag one tile onto a piece and then move the piece, and we see that this is happening. Well, in order to illustrate what's happening exactly, we are going to the chessboard.tsx, and in our chessboard.tsx, you can, by the way, press Ctrl P on Windows in order to search for files at the top. And then if you just search for the file name, we see, if I type in chessboard, we get chessboard.css and chessboard.tsx, which is one way to navigate through the files of your code. Right here, we have a couple of methods, and we call those methods right here. When we move the mouse, when we press the mouse down, and when we lift the mouse up. First thing that's happening is, well, if we press the mouse down. So right here, what we want to say is console.log mouse down. And let's do the same thing for the move piece. So right here, mouse moving, and then we want to add it to the drop piece as well. Mouse dropped. That's not the correct way. Let's make this mouse lifted, because the first one was mouse down and this one is lifted. So mouse up. that should be a little bit more meaningful. All right, so let's refresh the page. And as you can see, we get a lot of logs that the mouse is moving, which is true because we are moving the mouse. If we now press the mouse, we see mouse down, and we also see that we get some mouse moving logs. And if we lift it up, we see mouse up and mouse moving again. Okay, so what happens if we grab a piece? We see mouse down, we see mouse moving, and if we drop the piece, we see mouse up. Okay, that's fine, right? Okay, let's clear the console and let's try and drag a tile onto a piece. We click on here, then we go to the piece and drop it. As you can see, we still get the correct logs, which is mouse down, mouse moving, and mouse up. Look at what happens right now. If we grab the piece and then go to here, we see that we had a mouse down, mouse moving. However, we are no longer getting any mouse movings if we move the mouse right now. So let's lift the mouse up again. As you can see, we still get mouse moving. However, I already lifted the mouse. So if I press the mouse again, we see that we get a mouse down, and then we get the same thing that we had before. We can move for a couple of pixels, and then it will not move anymore. And if we lift our mouse, the piece is still at the cursor. So right now, if we just click and drop, the piece is at that position. So something is happening that is causing the piece to stop following the mouse if we drag a tile onto the piece. So let's refresh this one more time. And if we drag a tile onto a piece and then drag the piece, we see that the piece is no longer following the mouse. And then if we lift the mouse, the piece is following the mouse. However, if we lift the mouse, we actually want to drop the piece, which is not happening. All right, so in order to fix this bug, what we want to do is we want to prevent an event from happening. And which event will that be? Well, we want to prevent the default event that is being emitted when we press the mouse down. So right here, we write a new line, which will be e.preventDefault. And then we add parentheses and then a semicolon, which is e.preventDefault. It's a function which prevents the default thing from happening when we grab a piece. All right, let's refresh the page. And now, if we grab a tile and go to a piece and then drop it, we see mouse down, mouse moving, and mouse up. And now if we grab the piece, we see mouse down, and now we can drag the piece. And if we drop it, it still snaps back. So we have fixed this little bug. We can remove the console.logs, but we do need to keep the e.preventDefault because that fixes the problem that we had. We're also going to remove it from here. And now we get an error in the log. However, if we refresh the page, it should be fine again, and we can move our piece again. Great. So the second thing that we had was with castling. And this has been pointed out by well-wisher Samrat, and he said that currently castling can be done even though when the king is in check. So here we have our king. Here we have a castle or a rook. And if we grab this king, well, it's not our turn. However, if we move a pawn and then grab the king, we see that we can castle, which is true because we are allowed to castle. However, if we just move a random tile or a pawn and then move the bishop to here, we see that the king is in check right now. We could also not move any of the pieces except moving a piece in between the attacker and the king, like the queen or the bishop or this horse or the knight. However, what is not allowed in this position is to castle. So this king is not allowed to castle with this rook. However, if we drag this king, we see that we are allowed to castle because there is a circle appearing around the rook. So in order to fix that, we need to modify the rules a bit. As you can see, when we drop the king onto the rook is now on the left side of the king and the king is in a safe position. However, this move was illegal. Alright, so in order to fix this, what we need to do is we need to know where all the valid moves are being created. As you saw before, the rook had a circle around it. So where do we determine whether a piece has a circle around it? That's right here. Here we have the pieces or the tiles, and here we have a highlight parameter. And this highlight parameter is equal to current piece of possible moves. It's equal to the same position as that we are in right now. If it is, then the tile can be highlighted. If it is not, then the tile will be false. All right, so in this case, the tile that the rook was on was in the possible moves from the king. So we need to see where the possible moves from the king are being determined. And in this case, that will be from the current piece. Where do we get the current piece from? It's equal to the pieces.find or undefined. All right, so where do we get the pieces from? If we press F12, then we get to see the origin of where this parameter is being passed on. And as you can see, it is a property which is being passed into the checkboard. So in order to see where we pass this property to the chessboard, we can press Ctrl-Shift-F, and then right here we can type chessboard. And then if we start with a smaller than sign, we see that we on the left side right here have a hit in the referee.tsx. And if we go to here, we see that this is the place where we render the component. All right, so here we also see what we are assigning to the pieces. If we now go to the board.pieces and press F12, we see that we go into the board.ts file. Here we have a property named pieces, which is a piece array. All right, so this piece array, somewhere in the board.ts, this piece array will do something. And the something that we're looking for is down here. It's in the possible moves. So let's just press Ctrl F and say possible moves. And we get 16 hits. All right, let's go through them and then we'll see which location is the location that we need to edit. So right here we have calculate all moves. Okay, that's fine. Then down here it's still calculating the moves. Here we have check currency moves. And then down here we are still checking the currency moves. Okay, basically we have two methods that we need to check. The first one is the check currency moves, and the second one is calculate all moves. However, as you can see, the current check currency moves is being called from the calculate all moves, and which means that we probably need to look inside of this method. Well, let's take a look, and here we see calculate the moves of all the pieces, and I'm glad that we have some comments for our code right here so that we can see what's happening. And then down here we see calculate castling moves, and that's probably exactly the thing that we need to edit. So here we see for const king of this.pieces.filter is king. So here we go through all the kings. If the king that possible moves is undefined, so if they don't have any moves, we continue. If they do have moves, we want to concatenate the moves of the king with the castle moves. And that is being determined in this method, getCastling moves. And in this method, the enemy moves have already been calculated. Okay, cool, good to know. However, what we want to know is how does this method determine the castling moves? First of all, if the king has moved, we return the possible moves because the king is not allowed to move. Then we check, we get the rooks from the king's team which haven't moved. If we have those rooks, we want to loop through them. And that's basically it, because if we don't have those moves or those rooks, well, then we don't have anything to loop through. So for each rook, we are going to determine the position or the direction. Then we want to add the adjacent position. So we want to determine where the rook needs to go. Then we want to say, hey, is the rook in the possibility to go to that position? And then we know that the rook can move to the adjacent side of the king, which is great. Then we are going to check if any of the enemy pieces can attack the spaces between the rook and the king. And this is where the mistake is, because we are only looking at the spaces between the rook and the king. However, we also need to look at the king itself. So here we get all the enemy pieces, and we are setting a variable valid And if we looped through all the pieces and valid is still true, then we know it's valid. However, if one of the tiles is being attacked, then valid is false. And we need to add one more thing. But before we do that, we are going to also add a comment, also checking if the king is in check. Let's save that up. And then right here, what we want to do is when we loop through the enemy pieces, first of all, we check if they have possible moves. Well, that's necessary. And if they have possible moves, we are looping through all the moves. And then right here, we are checking, okay, if the tile that is concerning, if the tile that is between the rook and the king is in the same position as the move of that enemy piece, valid is false. Instead of doing that, or well, besides doing that, let's say if king dot position dot same position as move, and then valid is equal to false. And then right here we want to say else if. Let's see, like this. We might want to add this piece of code down to here, and then we can say checking if the king is in check. So what we do right here is we have the king, and the king is the piece that we get through here. And we take the position of the king, and we check if the position is the same as the position where an enemy piece can move. If it is the same, then we know that the move or the castle move is false. If it is not the same, then we want to check, hey, is it one of the concerning tiles? If it is it the same position as the move? And then we set valid to false, which we had before. So that has not changed. Alright, so I'm going to set up the situation that we had on the right side again. Alright, so right now we have the king and the rook. And now if we click on the king, we don't get anything because it's black's turn. Alright, so now the black pieces have played. And now if we grab the king, we can see that we can castle. However, what if we don't castle, but just move the bishop to here? Now, what we can do is we can no longer castle. As you can see, when we click on the king and drop it on the rook, it's being pushed back to its original position because it is not allowed to castle. What's the best move for white in this position? One of the better moves would be to just take the bishop because we can with our pawn. And now if we move the black pieces down again, then we can see that we can castle again. Alright, so now we have also fixed this bug. Thanks for watching, I hope you could follow along. Leave a like, comment down below, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!